First, trigger warning for sexual assault. Second, Tuca and Bertie is one of my favorite shows ever, so I have no idea how I'm going to do it justice, but I'll try. It's a show about being a woman, and part of the reason I am making this video is because YouTuber Melon T said she would like to hear more women's thoughts on the show, because most of the commentary she could find was coming from men. Bertie is a sexual assault survivor, endures sexual harassment, and doesn't get good support from other women most of the time. Later on, Tuca deals with extremely painful period cramps. Some of what Tuca says in her flashback in the episode The Pain Garden might seem dramatic, especially to assigned male at birth people, and even to some assigned female at birth people, but I have actually passed out and thrown up from period cramps before. It's actually very realistic. When we find out why Tuca's been having these hell cramps in the last episode, Dr. Mole tells Bertie that there is a 50% chance doing the operation will impact Tuca's ability to have children. If this show continues, wow, that hurts to say. If this show continues, then because of Tuca and Bertie's tone, I expect that Tuca will have fertility issues. Princess Carolyn's arc about struggling to have a baby was one of the best handled elements of BoJack Horseman, from showing how ashamed Princess Carolyn was of it, to showing why you shouldn't just immediately suggest adoption if you know someone who's going through this. Because even though that's a solution that would make perfect sense to me in that situation, it's something that not everyone wants, for reasons that might be hard to explain, and they shouldn't have to explain. Even though Princess Carolyn ends up adopting, she needs to make that decision herself. And they could still do something new with it, like have Tuca struggle through a particularly difficult pregnancy. Tuca and Bertie shows different ways women react to sexism. Bertie gets sexually harassed at Condé Nast, but when Tuca works there temporarily, she handles it way better, almost laughing it off. Or a woman could just leave, like Dakota, or ignore it like Winter Garcia does before Bertie confronts her. The show makes sure to portray good, bad, and in-between examples of feminist rhetoric. Women taking up space is a very imperfect group. For example, that one member said Bertie shouldn't apologize even though Bertie was late, which is a valid reason to say you're sorry. When people say, "Women stop apologizing challenge," they are trying to convince women to stop apologizing when something isn't their fault. That same woman gives Bertie side-eye for the rest of the meeting. They also do that dumb exercise where they stuff their pants and spread their legs as if that's actually going to help anyone. Man bros aren't the enemy, the structures that keep them in power are. It also conflates being a man with having a penis, a very anti-trans idea. Not very feminist of you to not stand up for some of the most vulnerable women out there. Trans women. At least practicing responses to catcalls might actually have a purpose. Women taking up space does help Bertie find some confidence, though. The employee Bertie hires is just using the rhetoric to be manipulative, and to another woman at that. Bertie standing up for herself with Tuca's help at Condé Nast was a good example of women being supportive to each other. I also love this show because it consistently hates cops. It's so great. A cop basically demands free sweets in Pastry Pete's bakery, and they go even harder when Bertie and Tuca get mugged in Planteau, and the cops talk like children about how they got their job right out of high school. Wow, an actual point. So different from BoJack Horseman, particularly the first 2 seasons. I also love how wacky this show is. It couldn't possibly take place in the same universe as BoJack, because in that world, being sexually harassed wouldn't cause a woman's boob to pop off and go get a drink. I find the barrage of awful therapists Bertie went to so relatable, even though none of them make a habit of interrupting her mid-sentence or tell her she needs to keep doing psychological exercises that she told them were consistently making her feel worse, like my therapists, but the show did touch on a very real issue while keeping it funny. I feel just like Bertie when she says she feels like a haunted house. Trauma is always on my mind and everything else is secondary. It's torn my life apart, and it's hard for me to even understand how someone could want a relationship with me when an actual doctor literally told my mom that witnessing my issues gave her clinical anxiety. I don't think I could have summed up how that feels better than the writers did when they made Bertie say that. They humanize Bertie's therapist, the one she actually keeps keeps going to. Having her watch cat videos between sessions and worry about the flood, but they do it without making her terrible. I also just really like these characters, even if watching this show does make me feel like I myself am a combination of some of Tuca and Bertie's worst traits with none of their redeeming qualities. It's not like I like them because they're perfect, they do pretty bad things. Bertie and Tuca just don't cross the lines that certain BoJack characters did. Although some of what Tuca says she's done definitely could count as sexual harassment and public indecency. Sniffing strangers' boxers, having sex while skydiving and in a locker room. The show never takes this seriously though, so as much as I don't like it, I am willing to just ignore it because, unlike BoJack Horseman, this show actually allows me to do that. Still, leaf raking is the worst episode for this reason alone. I like the idea of this weird horny plot, but it wasn't handled well. Get a room, there are innocent bystanders here. At least Bertie went into the bathroom to jerk off. As for the wrong actions the show does take seriously though, Tuca just disappears on Bertie. Twice. And I think the worst thing Bertie does is drink at a party after she offered and agreed not to drink to make it easier on Tuca, the recovering alcoholic, and then Bertie rubs salt in the wound by uttering the words, "It's harder for me." If I were in Tuca's situation, I don't know if I could forgive Bertie. I mean, I hope I could eventually, but it certainly would have taken me way longer than it takes Tuca. Bertie also looks at Tuca's text without permission, which is very bad already, don't do that. The only exception being if you have a reason to believe someone might be in physical danger, but what Bertie does next is worse, and possibly illegal. She pretends to be Tuca. Speckle also gets involved in the scheme, and in the final episode of the season 3, Figgy realizes and is genuinely terrified of Speckle. I really want to see how this gets cleared up, and if Figgy can be the bro friend Speckle always wanted. So much that I seriously thought about writing fanfiction of it, and I have never seriously thought about writing fanfiction before. That's the hold this show has on me. I love Speckle. Who wouldn't? He's basically the perfect man. He's respectful, supportive, dorky, and he gets the prettiest doorknob for his girlfriend Bertie. Though he is the kind of artist that really needs to be reined in sometimes, and he does have a habit of sticking his big bird foot in his little bird beak. As painful as it is, his Spotlight episode is one of my favorites. It highlights an issue that I worry about constantly. The fact that if you have a severe mental illness, it will affect the people you care about negatively. You could say Bertie is being inattentive, but I think she might just be dealing with her own struggles the best she can, and even if she were more attentive, watching someone you deeply care about have frequent panic attacks is going to have an effect on you. And if they get worse, those effects are going to get worse. It's also rough watching how Speckle just wants to do good and gets roadblocked at every turn. And Pastry Pete is such a great villain. He starts off as someone Bertie admires. His argument when Bertie leaves almost makes sense, and the show even acknowledges the complicated problem that people like him don't generally just disappear after they're exposed. And maybe it's not always reasonable to expect that. I mean, it's hard for me to feel sympathy for people who sexually harass vulnerable women, but it would be wrong to just let them starve, and under capitalism, that means they need a job. And what exactly are people supposed to do? As much as I don't feel sorry for them, it does seem like wallow in guilt every day for the rest of your life isn't a satisfying answer. I would say doing some feminist reading and donating to or volunteering with a charity that helps women, as well as trying to treat women better in their personal lives is a start, but honestly that's all I got, and it still doesn't seem like a good answer. I hope we get as much more Tuca and Bertie as the team cares to make, but if it really is over, it was very fitting that it ended with an episode about how meaningful the friendship between the two main characters was.